How do you do that without a teleprompter? You have to tell me all your secrets later behind the curtains. That was so good. That was literally the price of entry. Like, that was worth the price of entry. So good. Another housekeeping note. While I do not want to lose you in this room, we do have a lot of amazing programming also happening in the other tents outside. So make sure that you guys look at your schedule and see if maybe one of those conversations is calling you. Now, Wolf earlier today mentioned some of our big sponsors for this event, but I would also like to mention some of today's booth sponsors. We have Me Center, the Center for a Stateless Society. We have Freedom Fest, the Fund for American Studies, Action for Liberty, the Center for Growth and Opportunity, Young Voices, Unite America Movement, American Institute for Economic Research, Reason, Individualism, Freedom Institute, and the National Rifle Association. Thank you all for making this happen. All right. Now it is my pleasure to bring us on to the next part. But before I do, if you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. Awesome. Thank you. So I'm about to bring to the stage two incredibly brilliant women. Now, these are women who are provocative, who do not want to offend, but are not afraid to do so. These are women who are unapologetic and uncompromising in their pursuit of truth. And both of their careers exploded thank you to a little something known as the internet. So can we please bring up Vanessa Rosa, also known as Gothix, and Gloria Álvarez, also known as Gloria Álvarez. Welcome to the stage, ladies. Que bellas. I get to be moderator for this part. Do you want to say hello to your audience?
Hello, hola, buenos días.
Hi, I don't speak Spanish.
That's okay, that's okay. All right, so the theme of this conversation is the power of social media in politics. It is a thing that's incredibly important that we do not talk about enough, and we still have not mastered, especially us in this room. So these two women are geniuses. They have the secret sauce on how to use social media, not as a weapon, but as a glue and as a way to open minds. So let's get started. I would love to hear, what was the turning point in each of your careers that was spawned because of social media? If you each want to sort of tell your story.
Me? Okay. Yeah. So I started as a creator on Twitch, playing video games. And I had the audacity to have a very problematic opinion. And I'm sure we all are very familiar with lots of those. And I had a very problematic opinion that pretty much pushed me out of that space. And that was, for me, the turning point where I realized I'm not allowed to talk.
Would you like to share what that problematic opinion was?
Are you ready for this?
Are y'all ready for this?
Are you familiar with The Little Mermaid? Okay. So The Little Mermaid, they are casting Ariel as with a black actress. And the dialogue I was seeing on social media was like, oh, if you have an issue with the actress being black, then you are clearly racist. And that is clearly nonsensical. So I went on Twitter and I said, stop that. And Twitter didn't like that.
Twitter didn't like that. That's
yes.
a surprise.
And that was what set everything in motion for me. Yeah. Did that answer your question? I'm still waking up.
It did. And I'm just curious to know, was the immediate reaction from the internet trolling and hating? Was it immediately people flooding to you because they appreciated that you were saying the uncomfortable, unpopular thing?
No, they hated me. It was Gothix is anti-black. Gothix has internalized racism. She hates black people. And it was just this vicious, just dialogue. And then every time I had an opinion, whether it was like, I'm going to vote for, this guy in politics or, whatever the opinion was, I just kept getting nonstop onslaught of just, you can't say that. You can't say that. So
as the trolling grew, I'm just curious to know what happened to your follower count.
Oh, my follower count went down.
Really?
Temporarily. Temporarily. And what I realized is the more I kept pushing through that sort of virtual mob, the more I started gaining in popularity. And it was because other people who are sick of this sort of self-censorship on social media are flocking to those that say, no, I have a voice. I want to be able to say what I have to say and not be, attacked for it. So temporarily, I lost followers, I lost support, but then I switched over to YouTube, and I think I got like 200,000 subscribers in 6 months.
Wow. I think that turning point is really important because I think we're all human here. There's no sociopaths in the room. As soon as you start experiencing some trolling on Twitter, you get afraid and you stop and you don't want to be canceled. You stayed. You did not let the mob win. And eventually your voice broke through and you gained 200,000 followers, which is amazing. Gloria, tell us your journey.
So my journey was starting with an amazing boss at a radio station who told me after 3 weeks, I was highly frustrated coming back to Guatemala after studying in very socialist universities in Europe. But before of that, I did an internship at the Cato Institute, and I graduated from the Libertarian Disneyland, also called Universidad Francisco Marroquín, UFM. So by this point, I go back to Guatemala and I'm like, what am I going to work on? I don't want to go in politics. I hate NGOs. I think the United Nations and the World Bank and the IMF are interested in never-ending poverty. So I went back to the radio. I used to be a radio DJ when I was like, studying. And my boss calls me and he's like, I want to see who is Gloria Álvarez on air. And I'm like, are you sure? That's going to be really problematic. And he's like, why? And I'm like, well, because I'm a libertarian. Liber what? Yeah. Imagine this is a world where dinosaurs were walking on Earth. This is back in 2010. No one knew what TikTok was, let alone COVID. And Facebook was just starting in Guatemala, right? Libertarianism was a word not known in Latin America outside of UFM and, like the few geeks all around Latin America that would know about these ideas by some reason. So I said to him, I am a libertarian. That means that I piss off the right wing because I'm not conservative, and I piss off the left wing because I'm not a socialist. Are you sure you want this on air? And he's like, yes. So I'm like, how do you sell liberty on air in a pop music station when your follower broadcasters, your colleagues, are talking about Lindsay Lohan and Kim Kardashian? Like, how do you engage? And I started with scholarships. So I went on air and I said to Guatemalans, listen, guys, the government wants you stupid because the stupider you are, the easier it is to buy your vote. So you have two options. Either you stay dumb with a very mediocre state education, or you don't have the money to afford private education, or you do what I did and you use the internet to free your mind. And as Craig told us already, your mind is your more important tool to live in this life. And this is what created polemics. Because in the minute that you propose to someone that they have the choice to either stay in their miserable life or change it, then you're gonna hit envy. Then you're gonna hit people saying, oh, you're just saying that because you're a white blonde girl, so of course you're rich. And I'm like, dude, my family comes from communist hellholes. My dad was Cuban and my grandparents as well. And my other grandfather was from Hungary. So literally, they arrived in Guatemala with nothing. So even if you see white skin here, yeah, it's not the privileged mercantilists and oligarchs from the past. No. So that's where it started. And now I thank my first haters in Guatemala, especially from the Marxist universities and all of that, because they prepared me for when 4 years later, I made a speech that went viral. So guess what? The crazy libertarian that was talking all this nonsense on the radio became a crazy libertarian now known all over Latin America. And since then, I have delivered more than 3,000 conferences. I have done a lot of public policy. I presented my presidential campaign in Guatemala, which is absolutely legal. We can talk about that later. But the thing is, in 11 years of doing this, consistency, as Gothix was saying, and staying true to yourself and submitting your mind to make sense, like Craig just told us, it pays off. But it pays off in the long run. Being congruent is not to be famous from one day to the next. No, being congruent is the currency that will pay in the long run. And in these 11 years, I've seen enemies of myself sending me private emails like, I used to hate you, Gloria Álvarez, back in 2012, and now, fuck You were so right about so many things. I am so sorry I called you a bitch. I've been insulted with all the insults that you can have in the Spanish language, and that's a lot, okay? I have seen my enemies being sued for sexual harassment. I have seen them die in their contradictions. So when you keep fighting for freedom and you let that congruency be part of your life, social media is just a tool. It's not that you go on social media to become famous. That's not what happened with me. I was doing real stuff in the real three-dimensional world, and social media was just my platform to put it out there. And just for you to know, I didn't even want it. I had a friend working in Microsoft in 2010, and he was like, you should have a fan page. And I'm like, what a narcissistic, egocentric kind of thing to have a fan page, you know, like who does that in Guatemala? And he was like, I don't care. I opened one for you. And I'm like, what? And he's like, listen, everything that you're saying on radio for 3 hours can live there 24/7. And thanks to that guy, now I have an 11-year record of all of my work. So whoever wants to research if I have always think the way that I have, which by the way, of course I changed my mind and I have evolved, but always for more freedom. In this moment in my life, no one can convince me that robbery or nationalizing is better than trade. No one can convince me that slavery is better than freedom. No one can convince me that communism is more attractive to other people. Why? Because I've seen it. So, yeah.
Thank you. Rapid fire questions. Has a social media post ever made you cry?
No.
Yes.
I can attest to this one. I was on the phone. I was on the WhatsApp call. Has a social media post ever changed your mind about a deeply held belief?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Just curious, do you remember what that was? You don't have to. It's okay if you don't.
I probably don't.
Okay. But you know that you've had an aha moment.
Many times.
Great. Because you are on the internet to allow others to have aha moments. So I want to know if it's reciprocal.
Yeah.
So then the question is, how do you both use social media not as a weapon, but as a tool to change minds? Like, what is your strategy? What are your tips for the rest of us?
I don't really have a strategy, if I'm being totally honest with you.
Please.
But what I have found works is that when I'm trying to get people to think about something, when clearly they're acting very emotional on social media, I try not to focus on the people that I'm trying to get them to think. I'm more concerned with those watching the interaction. And this happens a lot with people, especially other content creators that will tweet at me for some reason or another. And they're very aggressive and I can't rationalize with that person. So I try to have a dialogue and just challenge them, keep my cool, not reciprocate any of the hate that they're giving me, because I'm hoping that the people watching that are kind of on the fence of like, is Gothix right or is she wrong? I'm hoping that they're watching that interaction. And a lot of the messages that I've gotten from people that have said, oh, you've changed my mind, have been people who have seen interactions like that. Like, you're very logical in the way that you think compared to this lunatic over here yelling at you on some other part of the internet.
That's so good. And I think we often forget that, because you're saying don't just pay attention to the person you're speaking to. There is a wild public audience of millions of people who are watching. What about you, Gloria? What is your strategy?
Similar to Gothix, I use my haters not to change their mind, but to post a very congruent answer that can appeal to others that are living in silence and in fear. Because what I'm experiencing in Latin America is that if you're a libertarian, you're going to have a lot of hate from the conservatives, especially in subjects like abortion and legalizing drugs and prostitution, and from the left. So being a libertarian means that there's not going to be a mob defending you against the other mob. So
wait, that's such a good point, and I want to make sure that that lands. Yeah. Like, being a libertarian inherently means A, you've got great ideas. B, they will be challenged, pushed back upon, and C, you don't get the benefit of a huge libertarian mob on the internet that will come to your defense.
Which I wouldn't want. I want libertarians to be living their lives, enjoying, and not be living through the internet, because you have two things. You have troll centers that are paid by the socialist governments of Latin America, and you have churches financing troll centers. And I have seen people become even more radical. They started in libertarianism, and now they are even saying that women were happier in the Middle Ages and that we should go back to those times. So we can talk about that later. But the thing is, use your haters not to change their minds, but to have congruent answers that make people that are in fear saying like, oh my God, this battle can be done. And you know, good news, 95% of the people have the same fears about liberty. Free markets are immoral. What about the poor? Legalizing drugs will all make us heroin addicts like in Trainspotting. So I have developed through the years in my digital notebook of my cell phone more than 2,000 answers. So whenever someone posts me about what about drugs or this, I already have elaborated answers that direct these people to other videos from other libertarians like John Stossel or Ayn Rand or Bastiat or SFL, because I want to be a bridge for people to have access to ideas that they would never get, right? And in my case, it was engagement what made me rise in social media. But this is back in a time where, mind you guys, this was 2010, and I went viral in 2014. The world is different now. Social media is way more controlled. You have a lot of ads. You have a lot of manipulation of data. You have silenced people. And I skipped that because I started, let's say, earlier.
So do you both think that ultimately social media is a power for good, or do you think ultimately it is undermining our liberties?
I think it is. I have a love-hate relationship with social media.
Don't we all?
And I think that it is a necessary tool for our message, but also a lot of people just don't know how to conduct themselves very well.
Let's get into that. Like, what are your biggest pet peeves and what are we doing wrong?
So my biggest pet peeves as far as having discussions on the internet is that, first of all, people act differently when they're behind a screen. That's the biggest thing. And it's very different from sitting there and having a face-to-face conversation with them, because you can read body language, you can feel more emboldened to ask questions. Whereas when you're on social media, a lot of people look at it as an opportunity for how many clicks can I get? How many social media impressions can I get? Am I going to look cool doing this in front of all my friends? And I feel like I think that is just not, it's just not helpful. So I think content creators like myself and other liberty-minded creators can help bridge that gap by starting conversations with their audience instead of just going directly to social media, because not everybody responds in that way.
I think you sort of covered this, but when someone asks you a question on a complicated ass topic, and you realize you cannot possibly capture a nuanced answer in 260 characters, 280 characters, how do you do it? How do you squeeze in a complicated truth in such a finite amount of space?
I inspire myself in Socrates. What I loved about Socrates is that instead of telling people why they were wrong and why he was right, he would start with asking, why do you believe that? And why do you believe that? And why do you believe that? So I find that conservatives and socialists, their problem is that they repeat like parrots, things that have been stamped in their minds like slogans, but they never entertain the analysis of going to the last consequences of the things that they say. For example, rights are given by God. Which God? Quetzalcoatl or Zeus or Mitra or Ra? And because each God has different conceptions of rights, which is yours? So instead of me telling, like, let me tell you why am I right and you are wrong, it's like, no, explain to me why you are right. And you can do that in few characters, and also a call to action. I always start my posts with making the person reading it having an option, right? That's how my video got viral. It was all about, let's dismantle socialism and populism through technology. You can be a vigilante of all the lies that are being told. So you put a task on people.
A call to action.
A call to action that takes them away from social media, because we don't need libertarians on Twitter. We need libertarians using social media because of what they're doing in the real world.
That's also a really good point. We think we're right, So we go onto Twitter and we're like, hey, let me tell you why I'm right. And what you're both saying is, instead of putting the onus on yourself to prove why you are right, it's putting the onus on the other person to prove why they are right. And now that you've begun to crack the thing and open it up. I'm curious if anyone has questions in the audience, because rarely do we get these two powerhouses on stage asking questions about the most important tool that libertarians have, and that is the goddamn internet. So does anyone have a question that they want to ask either Gloria or Gothix? If you don't, I will keep going because I'm Cuban and I can talk for a very long time. All right, well, I will keep going. I'm curious to know, when both of you start creating a social media post, in your mind, who are you writing to? Like sometimes in my mind, when I'm writing a post, I'm specifically writing to my haters. And then I get so classy and I'm like, I'm going to say this thing so elegantly, so nice that they can't possibly hate me after this. And then sometimes I think I'm talking to like my fans or my family out there. So who do you speak to?
I imagine that I'm speaking to a toddler.
A toddler.
Yes. And again, this goes back to people act differently on social media. And especially if someone is coming just really aggressive and just like, you're wrong, you don't know what you're talking about. I have to speak in a way, because obviously they're speaking from, it looks like they're speaking from emotion. So I have to just simplify my words and shorten the sentences and just keep it simple. One question at a time. I don't like to write big paragraphs because their eyes are going to glaze over and they're not going to pay attention to anything. So just spoon feed the information to them is what I usually do.
So good, so good.
I use different emotions for different messages. For example, if I am talking about Latin American politics, I appeal to your indignation because I know most people are fed up with Latin American politics. So I appeal to indignation. If I want to share an event like this, I appeal to your inspiration, to your self-esteem, to be a better person. And I talk in a more happy way, let's say. If I want to teach something, I think of how I would say this to a kid, because adults that have been brainwashed by state education or dogma, they are like even worse than toddlers, because toddlers are like a blank slate. So it depends on how you talk to them, what you can get from them. But adults that have been dogmatized, it's like you have to start from a point that has to trigger some emotion. I am not afraid of triggering anger or fear or envy, because you need emotion to then that person reflect on their own mind. So I don't mind, like people hating me for 5 years and then say, oh my God, you were right. And I'm like, yeah, welcome, it's fine.
This question is specifically to Gloria because you don't just speak to English-speaking audiences, you also speak predominantly to Spanish-speaking audiences. And the elephant in the room with that is that, unfortunately, there is a knowledge gap between the Latin world and the rest of the Western world. Like in Latin America, we're still talking about goddamn abortion rights. She says, as the US is still talking about goddamn abortion rights. So how do you speak differently to the Latin audience?
Oh my God, yeah, that's a huge thing, and I say to Latin Americans that have approached libertarianism, and as I told you, I wrote a book called How to Talk to a Socialist, and then I wrote a book called How to Talk to a Conservative. And in this second book, I talk about this conservative wolves that are disguising themselves as libertarians when they're not, And because there is the language gap, most of Latin Americans who are following these people, they have no idea who Milton Friedman is, or John Stossel, or Ayn Rand, or Bastiat, or Adam Smith, and they don't read them. Their only access to libertarianism is these crazy lunatics that talk about Marxist liberties. So if I am all about gays loving each other and marrying each other, it's like, oh, you are doing a favor to cultural Marxism. So the fact that there's a lot of information in English that it's not translated into Spanish, it's an issue for me. But I have no problem in tweeting. That's a big problem. And also that Latin Americans don't like to read. So yeah, we need in the 21st century people that are willing to dive in the 1,000 pages of Atlas Shrugged or The Wealth of Nations or Human Action by Mises, and then having the creativity of making that a meme, a tweet, a TikTok. That's going to be a really high requested job in this century.
Thank you for that. I built my career on YouTube. I spent 10 years creating videos on YouTube. Then I worked for E! News. And a truth that is like the biggest truth in the internet is that anger works, whether we like that or not. Anger is highly monetizable. Anger will get you all to act, to leave your homes, to go protest, to potentially burn down a building. I have been that person, and I have been the person creating the content that gets you to do that. My question is, while anger is highly effective at influencing audiences, is it good? Is it right? Is it bad in the long game to use anger?
If you know how to use it. What I tell people, it's okay to feel whatever. If you feel a certain emotion, that's fine. But what's the next step? What now? It has to be followed up with action. If you're just going to be angry and burn down a building, that does nothing. So what are you going to do to solve this problem? You're angry about it? Okay, let's channel that energy and put it towards action.
Beautifully said.
I agree. It's okay to feel angry if you are with indignation about the wrong things in the world. And that's where objective philosophy is so important, because if you commit your mind to common sense, it is okay to feel anger for indignation about communism and Holocaust and fascism and Venezuelans losing private property. Those are things to be angry about, but that doesn't mean that you have the right to then violate other rights, because that only creates a never-ending cycle, right? It's like domestic violence. You don't resolve violence with violence. So get angry, entertain that feeling, but go beyond the feeling to the action and the thought, as Gothix is saying.
Okay, one last question. We have 1 more minute. Before we go, I'd love to hear from both of you. You are what you eat. You are what you consume on the internet. Your output directly correlates to your input. So who are the people that you follow? Who are the thought leaders that you think are doing it right and that you don't necessarily agree with, but you like how they do it? Aside from each other.
Okay. Eric July, Young Ripa, shout out to you. Zuby is another one. I also follow a lot of Jordan Peterson. And I'm going to keep the list short. I'm going to stop there.
That's a powerful list.
Yeah.
So I follow T.K. Coleman, Jason Silva, Carl Sagan, and Rand, a lot of libertarian think tanks, John Stossel, Antonella Marti, Axel Kaiser, Juan Ramon Rayo, Maria Blanco. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you both for sharing your time with us, for sharing your knowledge and your secret sauce with all of us. Everybody watching at home, what a privilege to share the stage with these two beauties and brains. All right, well, this part is over, and now we're going to take a 5-minute break. Before we do that, I also just wanted to give a shout out to some of our other sponsors. We have the Libertarian Party, Mrs. Caucus, Ladies of Liberty Alliance, People for Liberty, Institute for Justice, America's Future, the Center for Economic Accountability, National Review Institute, Americans for Prosperity, and Atlas Society. And please, a round of applause for Gloria and for Gothix. Thank you so much. So much gold in this session so far. We are now going to have a 5-minute break, not a Cuban 5-minute break, but a white person 5-minute break. So go potty, drink, and be back.